Hi everyone and welcome back to Everyday Empowerment English. I'm Mia.
And I'm Alex. Are you putting in hours learning English but feeling like you're not getting anywhere?
It's a common frustration. You're dedicated, you're studying, but the fluency just isn't clicking. Why is that?
Well, today we're diving into why many common English learning methods often fail to deliver real results.
Exactly. We're going to uncover some key mistakes learners often make, and more importantly, give you science-backed strategies to learn smarter, not harder, and finally feel empowered in your English journey. Let's get started.
So, why do so many learners feel stuck even when they're trying hard? It often comes down to these common mistakes.
Let's start with grammar. Grammar is seen as so important, and it is. But
what?
We've all been told grammar is essential, which is true. But many methods emphasize memorizing grammar rules before you can even have a basic chat.
Right? Think about textbooks that are filled with grammar exercises in the early stages, but not much real life conversation practice. It's like learning all the rules of soccer, but never actually kicking a ball.
Research shows that language learning works best when we focus on meaningful communication. Isolated grammar drills, especially at the beginning, don't prioritize that.
Yeah, I see what you mean. So, grammar drills alone aren't really focused on communication itself, are they? And building on that, another really common thing learners do is create these massive vocabulary lists, hours spent trying to memorize words in isolation. Did you ever do that?
Flashcards and endless lists. It feels like you're being productive, doesn't it?
It really does. But cognitive science tells us that our brains just don't remember words that well when they're just floating in our heads with no context, no connection to anything real. It becomes rote memorization, you know.
Rote memorization, what exactly does that mean?
It's like learning something just by repeating it over and over without really understanding it deeply or connecting it to anything. Like, you can rote memorize a phone number by repeating it a bunch of times, but you might forget it quickly because you're not really understanding what those numbers mean or how they relate to each other.
Okay, I get it. So, when we just try to rote memorize vocabulary lists, it's kind of the same thing. We're just repeating words and definitions, but not really making those deeper connections in our brain.
Exactly. It's like trying to memorize a list of random objects: apple, chair, cloud, book. It's hard to make it stick because they're just floating puzzle pieces without the picture on the box to guide you. And that makes it so much harder to actually use those words in conversations.
But definitely. Okay, so we've talked about grammar in isolation and vocabulary lists. What's another common method that maybe isn't as effective as we think?
How about relying only on passive learning? This is a big one. Learners might spend hours listening to English or reading, thinking that just soaking it all in will magically make them fluent.
Boy, and again, listening and reading, they're still super valuable parts of learning, right? Like, we're definitely not saying stop enjoying English movies and TV shows.
No way. Watching movies in English is fantastic. Think about it. You're hearing real English, seeing how people use the language in context. It's really engaging, great for building your ear and expanding your vocabulary.
We totally agree. Movies are awesome for input, for getting immersed in the language. But let's be real. Can you learn to speak English fluently just by watching movies?
You can learn a lot about English from movies for sure. It's like you can learn a lot about how to dance by watching amazing dance movies all day long.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
You can admire the dancers, you can understand the steps in your head, but are you actually learning to dance yourself just by sitting on the sofa watching?
No, you have to get up and move. You have to practice the steps. You have to try it out yourself, even if you feel a bit clumsy at first.
Exactly. And it's the same with English speaking. Watching movies gives you a lot of understanding, just like watching dance movies gives you understanding about dance. But to become a confident English speaker, you actually have to speak. You have to practice doing, not just watching.
Perfectly said. So watching movies, fantastic for enjoying the language, for getting input, for building your understanding, but for actually developing your speaking and writing skills, we need to move beyond just watching and actually, use the language ourselves.
Okay, so now comes the good part. Let's switch gears and talk about what does work. What are some really effective science-backed strategies we can use to learn smarter?
Yes, let's get to the solutions. So strategy number 1, and this is so important, prioritize active speaking and real communication right from the beginning.
Absolutely. Find opportunities to actually speak English, even if it's just a little bit each day.
And it doesn't have to be perfect. It's about practicing communicating, even if you make mistakes.
Why does it work?
Because speaking is the goal for most learners. You learn by doing. Active communication helps you internalize grammar, build fluency, and overcome speaking anxiety. It's direct practice of the skill you want to master.
Love it. Okay, so what's the next step to build on that? What's our second powerful strategy?
For strategy number 2 is to learn vocabulary in context and use active recall to remember those new words.
Like we were just saying, right? Not just lists of words.
So, when you encounter a new word, don't just look up the definition and move on.
Nope. Write it down in a sentence, create flashcards with example sentences, use spaced repetition apps to actively test yourself and recall those words later. It makes a huge difference.
And it makes learning vocabulary so much more practical, right? You're learning how words are actually used.
Precisely. Okay, what's strategy number 3, Mia?
This is something that might sound a little technical, but it's super powerful. Focus on comprehensible input.
Comprehensible input. It sounds like something from a science textbook. What does it mean?
But basically, it means immersing yourself in English listening and reading materials that are just slightly challenging for you, but still mostly understandable.
Like podcasts, videos, books, articles that are maybe a little bit above your level, but you can still follow along, get the main idea.
Exactly. The magic of comprehensible input is that when input is comprehensible, meaning you understand 80 to 90% of it, your brain subconsciously picks up patterns.
Okay, I get it. You're focused on understanding the meaning, and your brain just naturally picks up the language patterns. That sounds much more enjoyable and honestly more efficient way to learn than forcing yourself through grammar drills.
And for our final strategy, it's about staying motivated and feeling empowered throughout the whole journey. Set realistic and achievable goals and track your progress.
Yes, principles of goal setting tell us that breaking down big goals into smaller steps is key for anything, really, but especially for language learning.
So instead of this vague goal, become fluent, set smaller, specific goals. Have a 5-minute conversation with a language partner this week. Learn 10 new words related to cooking.
And track it. Write it down in a journal. Use an app, whatever works for you. Seeing that progress, even small steps, is incredibly motivating. It gives you that feeling of, hey, I am moving forward. I can do this. Okay, before we finish up, let's do a quick vocabulary boost, just to highlight some key words we used today. First up, we have rote memorization. Rote memorization is learning something simply by repeating it many times without necessarily understanding it deeply or making connections. For example, trying to learn grammar rules through rote memorization alone is not very effective for communication. Next, we have grammar drills. Grammar drills are exercises that focus on practicing specific grammar rules, often by repeating patterns or filling in gaps, sometimes without much real-life context. Example, many traditional textbooks use grammar drills extensively, but they can be quite boring. Then there's in isolation. When you learn something in isolation, you learn it separately from anything else without context or connection. Example, learning vocabulary in isolation, just from word lists, makes it harder to remember and use. Our next word is immerse. To immerse yourself in a language means to surround yourself with it as much as possible, often by traveling to a country where it's spoken or by filling your life with the language. Example, some people say immersing yourself in English media is the key to fluency. We also have subconsciously. Subconsciously means doing something without actively thinking about it or being fully aware of it in a way that happens automatically in your mind. Example, with comprehensible input, you learn grammar patterns subconsciously without needing to memorize rules. Our sixth word is context. Context refers to the situation, words or sentences around a word that help you understand its meaning. Example, learning new words in context within a story or conversation is much more effective than using word lists. And finally, we have active recall. Active recall is a powerful learning technique where you actively try to remember information from your memory instead of passively reading or just listening again. Example, active recall is much more effective for long-term memory than simply reviewing your notes again and again. So, there you have it. We hope this episode has helped you understand why some common English learning methods might not be the most effective and given you some powerful science-backed strategies to use instead.
But exactly. Think about which of these time-saving strategies you can start using this week. Let us know in the comments. We're always excited to hear about your progress.
By focusing on effective methods, you can take control, make real progress, and feel more confident. That's what Everyday Empowerment English is all about.
For more everyday empowerment and practical English tips, make sure you subscribe to Everyday Empowerment English. And don't forget to download the free cheat sheet for this episode. It summarizes all these strategies we talked about, all in the description below.
Keep learning, keep growing. See you in the next episode.